Internet. Today's video, I'm going to be talking about disability and my perception of disability. Growing up and having 37 siblings, my views of disabilities were very different. I didn't really view my siblings as being disabled, even though they were. I just viewed them as my siblings. When I was younger, I used to put disability on a hierarchy. So I don't have hands. So somebody who has hands is higher than me. But I can walk, so I viewed myself as being better than somebody in a wheelchair. And obviously, that's just a very terrible thing to do. The reason why I put people on a hierarchy was because, for example, my disability is very physical. I can't hide from my disability. People who have one visible disability, they can act or pass as being normal. Unlike myself, where little kids would be like, hey, what happened to your hands? I love when people ask me questions. I think that asking questions about my disability, it creates a dialogue. A lot of kids, they're just curious. They're not trying to offend you. When little kids ask me questions, a lot of the parents are like, no, 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 don't do that. And I hear that and I'm like, hey, hey, it's okay. I want kids to ask me questions because the only way we're going to learn about somebody's disability or about how to help is by asking questions. I know there are a lot of individuals with disability who they don't want people to ask questions because I think it's because they feel shame. They feel shame that they have a disability or that they can't do everything. When I see somebody else with a disability, I don't always talk to them, but sometimes I do. For example, I met somebody who doesn't have two hands. I asked him, hey, how do you write without hands? He was holding a pen and he was showing me how he does it with his prosthetic, and I thought, that's freaking cool. If we were allowed to ask questions or if we felt like it was an acceptable thing, I think more people would be willing to be open-minded about that if they are allowed to, right? But if somebody feels like they have to hide or they feel like they can't show or talk about their disability, it is going to be something that's going to be challenging to dispel. It took a long time for me to accept my disability. Something about my disability that I never have to worry about is people believing me, right? My disability is so visible where nobody's ever told me, JJ, you don't deserve to be on SSI, right? They've never said that. Or they don't say, like, oh, JJ, you're just too lazy because of your disability. In the subreddit of disability, there are so many people who they just don't get believed because their disability is more invisible, right? If you have like fibromyalgia or if you struggle with multiple sclerosis, a lot of doctors, it takes such a long time for a lot of disability people to get a diagnosis because the healthcare in the United States isn't always the best. I get free healthcare and I'm very grateful for that. But there's so many people who don't have free healthcare, and that's something that needs to change. I read a story the other day about somebody who they struggle with chronic fatigue and they feel like they couldn't ask their parents to help them build their shower chair because their parents were like, you're just being lazy, or we don't believe you, or things like that. And the fact that this individual felt like they had to assemble a chair just so they can take a shower. And they were saying how building a chair took a lot of energy, but if they took a shower, their bedding is still going to be dirty. So they're just getting back into a dirty bed. I have to acknowledge my privilege. I have a lot of privileges that a lot of people don't have. I want to help fight for those people who have disabilities, but they just aren't being believed. So growing up, I felt like I had to prove my disability. And the reason why I felt like I had to prove my disability was the first person that actually tore me down and tried to tell me that I couldn't do something was actually my own mom. My own mom wasn't very supportive, and she would try and tell me, she would try and say, like, oh, you can't do this, or JJ, you can't do that. And I had to feel like, you know what? You said that I couldn't do that, so I'm going to prove you wrong. Having to always try to prove somebody, there's going to be some people who will always judge you, or there's always going to be somebody who says, well, you can do this but you can't do that. That gets very, very tiring, and it gets very lonely when you have to prove that I can do something. But here's something that I really want people with disabilities to know: nobody knows your disability as well as you do. If somebody tells you that you can't do something, maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong, but if you want to see if you can do it, do it. And if you can't do it, the fact that you even tried is better than not trying at all. And that was something that really was in my mind. If somebody told me I couldn't do something, I had to feel like, no, I can do it, and I am going to do it. And it's great being able to prove people wrong, but you shouldn't have to. Something else that happened was I used to say that I was differently able because I can still do everything. But here's the thing about disability. Disability does not mean inability. Disability just means that you might need help with this or you might need help with that. Everybody needs help. That's something that I feel like is important, is being differently abled or being disabled or whatever you want to call it. It really it's really about your own perception. If you want to call yourself differently abled, that's up to you. Just like I used that term for the longest time. In junior year of college, I applied to an internship at Eskenazi Hospital here in Indianapolis. The internship was only for individuals who had disability. One part of my internship was I met a friend. His name's Jeremy. He was born with Klinefelter syndrome, which means that he was born with two X's and a Y. I thought it was so cool seeing him doing things. His disability is also kind of visible just because of, his face and his height and things like that. I really admired like who he is as a person because he's a hardworking individual and he really cares about the people that he cares for. I think he's a social worker. He was one of the first people that helped me shift my viewpoint on disability. So during my internship, there was a guy who came in. I was very surprised by who he is. So he's only about 2 or 3 feet tall, and he has electric wheelchair. Finding people who are also disabled and also being successful, that's something that most people just don't see. So there was somebody else that helped me shift my perspective. My friend that I met through Reddit, he's completely deaf and he was born deaf. To me, that was so cool because a lot of the perception of deaf people that I know of is, there are people who are deaf who think that people who wear hearing aids, why are these people wearing hearing aids? They should be proud that they're deaf. It's very hard for people to accept if somebody's wearing hearing aids because in the deaf culture, there's no filters. They are very direct and they ask what some people might say rude questions. I don't understand what being deaf is like. I will never understand what it's like to be deaf. And it's not my place to try to understand what it's like to be deaf because that's not my fighting, right? That's somebody else's fight who is deaf. The fact that my friend, he has lived his entire life without hearing aids, he's a very successful professor. It made me feel like I should be proud of my disability. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and I will see you in the next one.